colleague Diana Chiangwa. Just before we begin, if you do have any questions during the course of this presentation, there's a box on the side of the presentation where you can type any questions, and we'll spend some time at the end answering those questions. Okay, let's get started. So for today, the general agenda we're going to follow, we're going to start looking very briefly at the summer and the previous fall from a price and demand comparison. We're then going to look at our team of meteorologists' seasonal outlook, both weather, precip, and temperatures. We're then going to look a little bit at generation outages coming up for the fall season and look at those in comparison to previous years. And then we're also going to have a little look at some of the nuclear outages we're anticipating for the upcoming month. And Diana's then going to walk through some of the transmission outages and the congestion risks that we're anticipating. We're going to look briefly at some recent developments in up-to congestion, and then we're just going to summarize some of the main points that we talked about today. Okay, so to get started, let's just look at, very briefly look at the summer from a price comparison and demand, and then we'll start looking at some of the forecasts our Mets are calling for this season. So looking at summer 2014, much weaker than in previous years. In particular, you can see through the late July, mid-August period, the orange line there, we ran much weaker than 2012, pretty much on par with 2013, some of that weather. It was really driven by below average conditions, particularly in ComEd and West. East Coast was closer to normal, and certainly in the last couple of years, on a seasonal average basis, 2012 was we did see stronger demand levels overall compared to, say, that tail off in the back end of 2013. In terms of our summer forecast performance that our Mets put out, so these are the graphics that our meteorologists prepared at the start of the summer. On the left, you'll see forecast temperatures versus actual temperatures. On the right is forecast precipitation versus the actual precipitation that we saw. So we did generally perform very well in the for the summer outlook. We were calling for below normal conditions for certainly the northern part of the U.S. and that largely stayed true, and it not extended to the East Coast somewhat. We saw 5 CP days noticeably weaker than the previous years, and slightly cooler in Mid-Atlantic and South. In terms of precip, generally on forecast with we were calling for above normal conditions in part of ComEd and Northern AP and normal outlook for the East Coast. Generally, that held well. Just looking at prices, so this is a comparison of 2013 versus the previous 5 years. So you can see we were much weaker last year for West Hub LMPs compared to prices going back to 2009. We averaged below the previous 5 years. We didn't peak above $50 for a single day, and the average for the fall of 2013 really back into the mid to high 30s as opposed to the 40s the previous year. In terms of looking at the fall coming up, we're going to run through some of the weather risks that our Mets have prepared for today. So starting with temperature expectations. Really the headline here, we're looking for a warmer East Coast through October and normalizing into November. Really developing El Nino conditions we feel are going to be the main impact on October and November. Cooler than normal, certainly in parts of ComEd and West. Looking for potential to see above normal temperatures in mid-A, so that may take us back a little when we start to get into kind of early heating load for the mornings, for the off-peaks. So that's really going to translate into seasonally weaker demand levels, we feel. As you start to get into November, you're looking at below normal conditions in parts of South and a really kind of a normal outlook for most of PJM. So again, some potential for a little bit more heating load in parts of South and West as we progress into late November. Looking at precip expectations, so in looking firstly at October, we're looking for a drier western half of PJM, and for the east, particularly south, we're really looking at some a little bit more lighting load risk forecast with above normal precip forecast, as much as 25–50% wetter than normal. For November, this trend is really persists further, much below normal for parts of ComEd, heading into normal as you start to the west, then much more precip for parts of South, parts of AEP, and the Mid-Atlantic, moving up towards the northeast. Much wetter November. That translates into lightning load risks as you start to see more unsettled weather, and that could also have the effect of limiting some morning heating load with a little bit milder precip risk. So we're just going to look now at some generation outages and compare those year over year, and then we're also going to look at some of the nuclear outages we're anticipating for this fall. So starting with PJM's forecast. So the graphic you're looking at here is the planned generation outages from PJM's outage service, or EDAR. So this is broken up into the western region and other regions. So essentially, ComEd and West included in West, and the Mid-Atlantic and South in the other regions. So you can see the green line represents the totals for 2014 versus the dashed 2013 total. West in blue, and other regions, the eastern regions, I'm going to call them in orange. So a word on this data: PJM's data doesn't include any forced outages. So any outages that of units that are forced to come offline won't be included in this value. Just looking at some of the trends here, we can immediately see that really looking for outages to peak through the front half of October, right around that 36 gigawatt level across PJM, before really falling off to the fairly minimal levels by the end of November as the maintenance season concludes. We can also see we're up pretty significantly from the peak of outages in 2013, where it appears they peaked around mid-August, just a shade under that 30 gigawatt level. So we're already up pretty significantly from last year. So just looking at that comparison in a little bit more detail, we can see that by the start of October, represented the green line, the total line, we're up by as much as 12 gigs year over year. That difference is really being pretty evenly distributed between West and East here. By the time you get through to mid to late November, you can see eastern outages remain strong, up about 6 gigs compared to the previous years, whereas we actually dropped below last year's totals for West, with about 2 gigs less on outage by the end of November. So in terms of risks, in terms of price risks, that does translate into some upside on energy costs. Potentially, that may offset some of the milder temperatures and milder demand levels we see, and really looking for more generation outage-driven volatility, as we have seen in the last couple of years. So then let's just focus on some of the planned nuclear generation outages that we're seeing for the season. So firstly, starting with the Mid-Atlantic and South, this is a screenshot from Genscape's real-time power product, where you can see that we're starting to really move pretty well into mid-season here. We have North Anna 2, which is due back at the end of October. or sorry, mid-October, should I say. Peach Bottom is due to start an outage as well as Salem. And then we're also looking for the Oyster Creek 1 unit to conclude an outage fairly soon. But most of these outages, these nuclear outages for the Mid-Atlantic and South, we expect them to be concluded by no later than mid-late November. Also looking at West and ComEd, slightly lower number of nuclear outages for this season. We've got the DC Cook unit currently on outage until late October. We're also looking at the Byron 2 nuke, which is starting an outage this weekend. That's expected to conclude towards the end of this month. And then a late start for the Dresden 3 unit. We're expecting that to be the 3rd of November through to the end of November. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Diana, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the main transmission outages that we've identified for this season and some of the congestion risks that we expect to see in outages.
All right, so we are definitely in store for a lot of outages that are currently scheduled, particularly as we start in October. Just looking at yesterday, we've already started to see a lot of big lines, major power lines also going up. In this section of the presentation, we're going to touch on some of the major congestion that we are kind of anticipating starting in October and also going into November. So just starting here with that Northern Dominion PEPCO region, we do highlight some 500 kV lines that are currently scheduled to go out. So here on your left, you see the map showing the 500 kV network, and in green, you can kind of the flow patterns that are sit in that region. So most of those are flowing into the region, and then when you take out some of these major lines, such as Brook to Loudon, also taking out the Dickerson to Pleasantville, and also the Brambleton to Loudon. So taking away most of that 500 kV network just leaves a pretty limited path, forcing into the flows onto the lower kV network. So some of the risks that we'll be anticipating starting this year include the Brambleton to Loudon 230 kV line, and also the Dickerson to Pleasantville right under the 500 kV. Both these outages will be pretty bullish for PEPCO as well as the West. And then also we have the Middlebrook line and the North Morrisville line also scheduled to go out starting next week. And with those lines out, we'll have a lot of that generation coming from Dominion, such as the North Anna generation, big nuclear plant there. One North Anna is currently out right now, but by next week it will be returning. So with a lot of that generation will be up into the north as well as PEPCO. We will see a lot of that generation kind of stressing. But for that, we're looking for the pressure around the distance arc. Again, this will be bullish for PEPCO, BG as well as the And then moving on to another area where we kind of identified some really major outages. This is that area between AEP and APS. So a lot of that 765 kV network is actually planned to go on outage. So that path from Gavin, Bauman, all the way up to Hammer is going to be out in the next couple of weeks. And with that out, most of that pressure is expected to just be transferred onto the lower kV network. So the kV network around there is 38. But overall, look at the 345 kV network will also already have pretty major outages in the fall. So in particular here we have the Canada West Valley and also the Martinham River to Waterford. So with the Martinham River to Waterford, we've already started to see some congestion around there, particularly the masking from 345 kV. So overall, this is some of the risks that we may expect to continue seeing throughout the rest of the fall, particularly on those days when we have load levels above 100 gigawatts for the RTO. So overall, just those higher load days, we may expect some of these areas to see some of this pressure as well. Most of this congestion will also be pretty bullish for the West Hub. And then also we wanted to focus on some of the external interfaces that we think are going to be impacted pretty heavily this fall. So we picked most of the interfaces in and around ComEd and AEP. So some of the outages that we have on this in the section are already out. So looking at A, which is really the quickest and Jones tie lines between ComEd and NIPSCO, that's been out since the beginning of September. And with this outage, we've definitely seen a lot of bearish congestion for ComEd and mostly bullish for NIPSCO. So some of the constraints we have been the Roxanne Express Air, the Venom to Monsanto. These are pretty big during the off-peak when we have more strength in those west to east flows coming in from ComEd going west into NIPSCO as well as AEP. And then for B here we have the DC nuclear generator. So one of those units has been out since the 24th, and overall not having that extra generation in AEP has definitely kind of increased the amount of flows necessary, from ComEd into AEP. So during the off-peak particularly, this is again when we see these similar constraints. Definitely just to note with the Cook Loop is that in the past years we've also seen this congestion affect more lines closer to NIPSCO. So the Michigan City LaPorte constraint particularly is something that was also seen with nuclear outages out. So while it's still a risk, we just wanted to highlight that given so far what we've seen this fall, most of the congestion has been bullish for NIPSCO and bearish for ComEd. So I think that overall, until the end of this line work, as well as the nuclear outage, we'll likely be seeing more of the bullish NIPSCO, bullish IMO, and FE type of congestion during the off. And then moving on to C here, we have the Broco to Lanesville line. 45 also just went out this past week, and overall we started to see some bullish congestion around Pana as well as Lanesville transformers. So this is bullish for the NIHub, MISO, Northwest, as well as NIPSCO. And what's going on here is that you have flows coming in from MISO pushing into ComEd. Particularly the generation we're looking here is around Kincaid, which is actually a PJM unit. So with Kincaid currently only running one of the units, we saw this congestion kind of come off. So we haven't seen this congestion with only the one unit. So overall, if we do have more generation in that area, we can expect more of that bullish congestion. But on this year, we have only one of these there. We can expect to see more of that Pana or Lanesville pair of transformer congestion. And then finally for D here, this will be later on in October, so it's now scheduled for next week. We have a Byron to Cherry Valley line going on. So this is a pretty major 345 line bringing in power from Byron up north to that Cherry Valley Valley station. So we do have a few things going on there. We have the Byron Nuke. One of them there is currently on outage, and at the same time they take out this line. So pretty much have taken out the line poses a lot of risk, which is one of the Byron nukes currently out. It kind of mitigates some of that pressure on the remaining network. But overall, we are still expecting to see some of this Cherry Valley transformer congestion or the power Byron to Cherry Valley line congestion as well. This is what we've seen in the past, where even with one of the Byron nukes out, we still get some congestion when that line is out of service. So overall here, I guess, just to summarize, we're definitely calling for more of a bullish NIPSCO. We definitely do have some risk there, given that we should see some of that congestion switch at any time to the Michigan City LaPorte. But overall, NIPSCO has been bullish, so has IMO. MISO and COMET mostly on the bearish side until the very end of October, when we may see some bullish congestion when the prior intermediary value line is out. So that concludes that transmission section, and then just to add some other equipment that you may also be interested in, we have a couple more slides here which you can go through and definitely contact us with any questions. But right now we're not going to really go through them in detail. And then we also wanted to talk about the recent developments that we have in the UTC space. So just to go over what is really going on there, we've had FERC has asked PJM to come up with a cost allocation for uplift charges for UTCs as well. So historically, we've had virtual transactions always paying an uplift charge, but this charge was never imposed on the UTC. So now FERC has ordered that PJM should come up with a cost allocation for these for the UTC transactions as well. And so overall, now we have some uncertainty in the time in which it will take PJM to kind of come up with a cost solution that will satisfy a lot of the stakeholders as well as FERC. And also at the same time, there's uncertainty in the amount of the charge that will impose on the uplift on the UTC as well. So what you're seeing on the left here, the first graph on top is really what PJM put out, just showing the decrease in the number of UTC bids over the past month or so. So the FERC order came in on August 29th, but was only published with the registrar on the 9th of September, on the 8th of September. So that's really when you see this really steep drop in UTC bids. And the main reason there is that FERC ordered that when this cost allocation is established, all transactions will have to incur costs starting on this date. So that's why, with all the uncertainty that we have, we just see a drop off in UTC transactions. And then at the bottom here is something that we put together that we're seeing every day. So we plotted during the same space of time just the number of binding constraints that we're seeing in PJM in both the day-ahead as well as the real time. And definitely, at least when you look at the day-ahead binding constraints, they show a significant drop as you come to that date, the 8th of September. And overall, I mean, you recognize there are multiple factors that could be contributing to this decline. So that's why we kind of also show the peak demand to show how much it's really not moving that much between the 7th of September going to the 8th of September. So overall, it's about the same amount of load, but we're seeing way less day-ahead binding constraints. In terms of the real time, we would expect that we'll start to see a lot more vulnerability in the network during the real time with less day-ahead binding. But overall, the data that we have right now is not particularly conclusive to make any big conclusions from take anything big out of this data. So overall, I think this is what we wanted to talk about here. Just continued uncertainty, not knowing when PJM could possibly come up with a solution to the charges that they need to put on the UTC transactions.
Okay, thanks, Diana. So just to summarize some of the points that we talked about in the Fall Outlook. So firstly, from a demand perspective, really the headlines that we're seeing: El Nino conditions, a cooler west and ComEd, warmer mid-Atlantic and south for October. Really looking at seasonal conditions across PJM, so some potential for some heating lows as we get towards the end of November. A drier outlook for Western ComEd offset by a wetter mid-A and south for October through November, so you could see some potential for some lighting load risks, giving some support to demand levels. In terms of generation, much more generation on outage this year compared to last year, so that definitely has some implications for those gaps in the supply stacks and volatility, a premium on energy cost alone, especially with a lot of those nukes out over the next month or so. Really looking at that peak of outage season mid-October, and we could see some of that that missing generation almost make up for potentially weaker demand levels. So as we've seen as recently as Monday, we are anticipating some risks for some generation-driven volatility as you see dispatch jump through the supply stack with that missing gen. And then lastly, transmission. Really the congestion risks we're focusing on for the fall to have the greatest impact. Firstly, DOM and PEPCO, really the story there that a lot of outages on the higher voltage 500 kV network, putting pressure on the 230 kVs, moving power through Dominion towards an AEP and APS into the PEPCO Dominion region, some upside risk on West Hub there. Similar story for some of those larger 765 kV outages, AEP. When we see a number of those on outage, we're really going to see a lot of pressure put on the 138 kV network in that area. And then lastly, ComEd and AEP, really seeing mixed risk overall for ComEd, some predominantly bearish with some upside risk towards the end of the fall. And again, ComEd is fairly susceptible to some of those interface risks, some of those external interfaces and power moving in from MISO, moving in as well. There's some upside risks pretty consistently to the IMO point there. And then also some wind-driven risk as we see potentially stronger wind generation moving into the fall season. So with that, we're going to wrap up our presentation. We're going to take a moment to just review any questions that you might have. We'll be back in a moment.
Okay, so the first question that we have is in regards to the fuel mix that we're expecting in the fall. So it is, what is the generation mix in the fall for PJM, coal versus natural gas? So I'll just go ahead and take that question. So generally, with the really low gas pricing that we've been seeing over the past few months, sometimes we've definitely seen the M3 price as low as $1.58. So just given those really low prices that we're seeing, we're also observing that overall traditionally baseload units such as coal are really being ramped down, particularly in the off-peak. So you see there's really big coal units in AEP being ramped down, pretty much throughout the entire off-peak. And then at the same time, we're seeing some combined cycle gas units actually staying online during this time. So you can see that there's definitely a fuel switch that we're seeing currently. And overall, I think this is something that we may expect to see for most of the fall. As we get into late November and the back half of November, we may expect some maybe chillier temperatures to overall just drive a bit more upside in those gas prices, which may return the fuel mix to kind of more of the traditional coal as the base load, followed by gas. And then another question that we have is
any major unit retirements planned for the fall? So we did look into this, and generally we're not seeing any real significant units scheduled to go on outage. Looking at PJM's retirement queue, it seems like really the focus period is going to be heading into early 2015, Q1, Q2, with a number of outages. But certainly or retirement, should I say, but certainly not as many outages you'd be looking for. Not any significant units that are scheduled to be retired. Okay, and with that in mind, so we're going to be sending out this presentation to everyone who attended with the recording and the slides. Also, if you have any more questions for us, if you'd like to request a free trial, the link here to the Genscape website, the Power Market Intelligence, is up here. Myself and Diana are available to answer any questions or to chat. Our phone numbers and emails are here, and we look forward to hearing from you. And thanks for joining us today.